A very good afternoon from Westminster and day 2 of the election campaign and the final Prime Minister's questions, with the row over national insurance rekindled in spectacular style. Gordon Brown this morning went on TV to say that business had been deceived by the Tories to support their proposals to partially halt the planned rise in national insurance. But that brought a swift response, with another 30 chief executives coming out to denounce the government's proposals as a tax on jobs. Our first report is from our political correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue.
Gordon Brown probably wishes he'd thought of a slogan like that for Labour's election campaign, but instead it's plastered on the wall of a business selling fruit smoothies, first stop on the Prime Ministerial tour. Today was meant to be all about political reform, but in an interview this morning, Mr Brown repeated the claim that more than 30 businessmen who'd opposed his rises in national insurance had been deceived.
I think they have been deceived, because the big issue at the moment is, can we sustain the recovery? I mean, I was around Kent yesterday meeting lots and lots of people, and what people are saying to me, look, we've come through a lot and it's been a very difficult global financial recession. We're coming through it, we're coming out of it. Britain is on the road to recovery. Now, don't put that at risk.
But as David Cameron and Gordon Brown arrived for their final clash at Prime Minister's question time, 30 more business leaders put their names to the list opposing the rise in national insurance.
This is a question about national insurance contributions. The Prime Minister has made the decision to introduce a jobs tax which will kill the recovery. Now, this morning on GMTV, he said that business leaders who oppose this decision have been deceived. Is the Prime Minister really telling us that he knows more about job creation than business leaders who employ almost 1 million people in this country?
Now, as far as national insurance is concerned, there is a choice. There is a clear choice. We can put the national insurance up and therefore protect our schools, our hospitals and our policing. Or we can do what the Conservatives traditionally do, and that's put our hospitals, police and our health service at risk.
But David Cameron was determined to quote one of the business leaders, to huge jeering from the Labour benches.
Paul Walsh, the head of Diageo, on the Prime Minister's Business Council. No, not a Tory, one of his advisers. Yeah. Well, he's probably a Tory now, so are half the country.
That drew a familiar response from the Prime Minister, hurling back a line David Cameron had once used on Tony Blair.
It's the same old Tories, Mr Speaker, to think he was the future once. Mr Speaker.
The Liberal Democrat leader returned to political reform, though. He was scathing about the other two parties' claims to want change.
The two parties are colluding together to block reform. Just last night, they colluded to block the most minimal reforms to our electoral system and to the other place, just like the way they came together to block our proposals to give people the right to sack corrupt MPs. They came together to block our proposals to clean up lobbying.
Reform of the voting system and Parliament was meant to be the big themes of the day. Instead, Labour finds itself back in a major row with business over its plans to cut the deficit. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, I'm joined now by the Work and Pension Secretary Yvette Cooper, Jeremy Hunt, the Conservatives' culture spokesman, and Ed Davey, Liberal Democrat Foreign Affairs spokesman. Yvette Cooper, first of all, have business been deceived?
Well, I think, of course, business want to have a tax cut, and why wouldn't they? But we've also got to make the right choices for the country.
But have they been deceived?
Well, I think that if they believe the Conservatives' promise that they can somehow not do national insurance contributions and also not cut education spending or put VAT up, which is what I think they will end up promising to do, then I think, then that's not actually realistic.
But just Brent Huberman, founder of lastminute.com, we've not been deceived. Ted Tuppen, Chief Executive of Enterprise. It's a bit rich for Gordon Brown, who's introduced more stealth taxes than anyone in history. John Lovering, chairman of Mitchell and Butlers. We are quite clear we have not been fooled. Wasn't it at best patronising and at worst insulting to these businessmen to accuse them of having been deceived?
Well, hang on, we're going to have to make some big decisions for the country. The first one is, what do you do in the next year? The national insurance contributions increase doesn't come in for another year, not until the economy is growing strongly. And we're very clear about that. First thing you've got to do is get the recovery going. That's where the Tories' plans would put that massively at risk. But then secondly, you have got to make some fair decisions about how to balance bringing the deficit down. So we've said, yes, that does mean businesses paying some, it means individuals paying some, it means the majority being paid by those on the highest incomes, and it means a squeeze and some tough decisions on public spending as well. The Conservatives have ruled out any of those things, and that is what is so disingenuous about their position.
Jeremy Hunt, if you ask businessmen would they like a tax cut, they're going to say yes, aren't they?
They are, but to say that that they've been deceived is absolute nonsense. These are people who read cash flow summaries, profit and loss accounts, balance sheets every day of the week, and they know perfectly well that the real danger in Labour's plans, it's a tax on jobs. We've got 2.5 million people unemployed, more people unemployed than when Labour came to power in 1997. And the reality is we need to encourage businesses to recruit more people, to employ more people. And what these businessmen are saying is that if you have this tax on jobs, it will deter them from recruiting more people. Now, the way we're going to fund this is through government waste that the government's own waste advisors, Dr. Martin Reed and Sir Peter Gershon, have identified.
You haven't said where any of that will fall. You haven't said any department where it will fall.
If you've got this waste, and you in your department will have been having Gershon efficiency savings over the last few years, you'll know these are real savings. If we've got it, why don't we start cutting it now, and then we can avoid this tax on jobs?
Davies, let me bring in Ed Davey. Where do you stand on this?
Well, of course, any businessman is going to want to have lower taxes, but what's incredible about the Conservative policy, and what Vincent Cable for the Liberal Democrats has said, is that they really haven't shown how they're going to pay for this tax cut. And to be honest, you've got to be truthful not just to these business people, but to the British voters. And to say that it can be paid for by efficiency savings, I agree with Jeremy, there are lots of efficiency savings to be made, but a lot of them being made now, and it was David Cameron himself who said just a year ago that to say you could pay for tax cuts from efficiency savings was deceiving people, was dishonest. Now the Conservative leader is being dishonest to the British people, and frankly, you should be apologising for changing your tune just before a general election. That's opportunism.
Okay, let Jeremy Hunt answer.
Let me just address that point, because it's very, very important.
What did you say last year?
Let me just address that point, if you wouldn't mind. The efficiency savings we're talking about, the government are already saving £23 billion this year. This is an additional £6 billion. It's less than £1 in every 100 that the government spends. Now, if you ask people at home, can they save that kind of money from their annual budgets? If you ask business people, can you save that kind of money when you're facing some kind of crisis? They say, of course they can. And we're saying the government should do the same.
It is important to address this, because it is disingenuous.
But I've noticed that you have not used the word deceived that Gordon Brown did this morning. You've steered clear of that.
Well, I think actually the Conservatives are practising a whole form of deception. I think they are. If they are promising people...
these businessmen have been
I think this is attempting to deceive everybody. If what they are saying is that you can magically bring down the deficit further and faster than we are proposing to do, and you can avoid any tax increases at all, and you can also somehow find this from waste where the government is already making huge efficiency savings. We've said where they'll fall. We've said, I've said my department will make £500 million for efficiency savings. They haven't said where any of these will fall. It's not honest with people.
I promise you we will revisit this argument, all of you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Let's speak now to our political correspondent, Laura Kunsberg, who is in the central lobby at Westminster for us now. Laura, where does this argument